Well, hello. In a previous episode, we looked at the Glasgow Leyland Atlanteans and their panoramic window problems. So I think it's only fair that we show the love to Scotland's capital city, Edinburgh. So come with me on a return journey when the Atlanteans howled around the streets of Edinburgh, as we take a look at Edinburgh's Leyland Atlantean fleet. Now, unlike Glasgow, Edinburgh certainly couldn't be described as an Atlantean pioneer. In fact, by the time that Edinburgh Corporation had taken delivery of its first Leyland Atlantean, Glasgow Corporation was operating more than 280 of the type. Now, the rear-engined Leyland Atlantean had been on the market since 1958. And I have done a video about the Leyland Atlantean and also the Glasgow Leyland Atlanteans as well. And I'll try to remember to put a link up to those videos in the top right hand corner. So despite the Atlantean being on the market all this time, Edinburgh Corporation had stuck to Leyland's more traditional front-engined Leyland Titan bus. Edinburgh Corporation was a valid customer and a big fan of Leyland motors. So why didn't they take any of these new-fangled, all-singing, all-dancing Leyland Atlanteans? Well, it was all a matter of timing. When the Leyland Atlantean entered production, Edinburgh had just spent somewhere in the region, in today's money, of around £35 million buying 370 new double-deckers, which had been delivered between 1954 and 1957. Now, this amount represented more than half of the total fleet, and the great majority of these were in fact Leylands. Now, there is no doubt that Leyland's sales department would have been keen to try and get orders from Edinburgh Corporation. Now, the transport manager of Edinburgh was Maurice Little, and it's pretty much inevitable that Mr. Little had made the 40-mile journey west to Glasgow for a personal viewing of LA1. LA1, of course, was one of the first 4 production Leyland Atlanteans and was for Glasgow Corporation. With this pioneer double-decker bus operating this close to him, Mr. Little would of course kept a close interest and a weather eye open to see how this bus was performing, which, to be fair, in its early days it wasn't always performing well. Now, these early Leyland Atlanteans suffered from all sorts of problems, and this included the failure of the Armstrong front shock absorbers and road springs, cracks in the rear subframe, failures in the seal between the gearbox and the angle drive, failures with the centrifugal clutch, and the lack of ventilation at the rear end of the bus led to high underbonnet temperatures, which played havoc with the electro-pneumatic control system for the gearbox. These early Atlanteans were also very underpowered as well, and this issue would cause at least Devon General to experiment with turbocharged engines. Now, many of the customers who bought these early Atlanteans, Devon General, Ribble, and indeed Glasgow Corporation, reverted to buying front-engine buses until all these issues could be ironed out. Indeed, Glasgow Corporation wouldn't order any more Leyland Atlanteans until the announcement of the Mark II Atlantean in 1963. The Mark II Leyland Atlantean had a few different improvements, and some of these included the engine and gearbox mounting brackets were now bolted, which meant that they could now be removed as separate units rather than an engine and gearbox removal in one go. The 0600 Leyland engine was uprated to 130 horsepower at 1,800 RPM. The self-changing gears fluid flywheel with a lock-up clutch became the standard in place of the centrifugal clutch. The gearbox electro-pneumatic control unit was moved and repositioned to help keep it cooler and also for easier accessibility. There would also be a redesigned universal coupling on the prop shaft and a larger fan drive shaft. In addition to that, though, the most obvious difference from the outside of the vehicle was that the rear engine cowl was split into 3, with the corner panels being bolted. the rear engine cowl on the Mark I Leyland Atlantean being a large, rather cumbersome one-piece fiberglass moulding. And this is probably the point where the Leyland Atlantean orders started to pick up, because Glasgow Corporation alone placed an order for 200 of the buses. Now, another reason why Edinburgh had ordered these 370 double-deckers that I mentioned previously, they'd been ordered to replace Edinburgh's tramway. But of course, Glasgow was in a different position because it replaced its last trams in 1962. Many of these trams being replaced by the large fleet of Leyland Atlanteans that I've just mentioned. Now, that's not to say that Edinburgh didn't try out the Atlantean, because early in 1960 a Leyland Atlantean demonstrator turned up, and this was 661 KTJ, which had been new in 1959. This was a PDR 1/1 with the Lowbridge Wayman bodywork. Now, this does seem a rather unusual choice as a vehicle to demonstrate to Edinburgh, which didn't really have any Lowbridge problems, and operated a fleet of full-height double-decker buses. The layout on these Lowbridge or semi-Lowbridge Leyland Atlanteans left an awful lot to be desired. The front upper deck was like a conventional double-deck vehicle with a central gangway and a double seat either side. It was only really towards the rear of the upper deck that things got a little bit messy and untidy. Here, the last few rows of seats were fitted in a Lowbridge design, with a gangway on the near side and 4 abreast seating. This being so there was enough headroom on the lower deck over the rear axle. Now, really, if you're trying to encourage people to buy the Leyland Atlantean, this probably would be the last bus that you would try and demonstrate to them and say to them how wonderful this bus is, isn't it, really? Now, although Edinburgh didn't have any low bridges, it did have a large single-decker fleet, and at this time it was looking to replace the vehicles and renew them within this fleet. And all the manufacturers were queuing up to try and convince Edinburgh that high-capacity double-deckers were the way to go rather than more single-decker buses. And this sometimes is the problem, that manufacturers and indeed bus dealers will try and tell you the vehicles that you want rather than the vehicles that you actually need, or, more importantly, the vehicles that you want. And this stampede by these manufacturers would see AC sending no less than 3 Bridgemasters between 1957 and 1963 to demonstrate their wares. Dennis would arrange for the loan of a Walsall Dennis Lowline, and Guy sent 2 Wolfrunians, all with front engines. So maybe after looking at that lot, that semi-Lowbridge Leyland Atlantean wasn't such a bad idea after all. Now, by 1964, Maurice Little had moved to the Scottish Bus Group as its chairman, and Ronald Cox had moved north from Bournemouth to replace him. Now, while Mr. Little had been rather conservative in his choices and had favoured the Leyland Titan PD3, and indeed the Leyland Titan PD2 for that matter, Mr. Cox had had previous dealings with the Atlantean in Bournemouth, and this had given him a little bit of an insight into the way that British cities were heading. The city fleets in Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, Sheffield, Newcastle and Belfast had all been early Atlantean and Daimler Fleetline customers. With this in mind, early in 1965, 3 demonstrators again descended on Edinburgh. Daimler supplied a Fleetline with Alexander bodywork, AEC supplied a front-engined Renown with Park Royal bodywork, and Leyland supplied a brand new Atlantean, again with Park Royal bodywork. These would be tested on 3 different routes to compete to see which one was the better bus. These 3 routes would be the 7, the 23 and the 26. An Edinburgh Corporation Leyland Titan PD3 would be used also in the trials as a benchmark bus. Now, interestingly, both the Atlantean and the Fleetline both proved to be better buses over the front engine models. And this was taking into account things such as reliability, fuel consumption and customer feedback, or in those days, passenger feedback. Mr. Cox recommended to the Edinburgh Corporation Transport Committee that they should order 25 Leyland Atlanteans and 25 Daimler Fleet Lines. But when they finally placed the orders, they decided to play safe and sanctioned for 25 Leyland Atlanteans and 25 Titan PD3s. And incidentally, these would be the last front-engine double-deckers for Edinburgh. Mr. Cox wanted to make sure that his new Atlantean buses made a massive impact in the city. Those of you who have watched my videos before have commented that the early Atlanteans tended to look rather bland and all rather the same. They just looked like boxes on wheels. But this was starting to change, as many of the big Atlantean customers were beginning to convince bodybuilders to start styling the design and making the buses look more attractive. Mr. Cox decided to take the attractive Alexander design, the very curvaceous J-type bodywork, which at that time was being delivered to Glasgow in rather large numbers. However, his plan was to replace the normal side windows on the Alexander bodywork with one 7-foot 10-inch long panoramic window for every 2 standard window bays. He also specified shrouds above the engine cover which partly disguised the bustle effect at the rear of the bus. However, this would make them very hard to clean, especially when the mechanical bus wash age came along. Anybody who remembers these Atlanteans, and indeed the Leyland Titan, the TN series in London, will know how dirty those back windows got when the bus wash couldn't quite reach in there. Edinburgh Corporation's first Leyland Atlantean, which was numbered 801, was shown at the November 1965 Scottish Motor Show. This bus featuring both of the features I just mentioned. Now it's fair to say it created a bit of a sensation at the motor show. Now, as I mentioned in my video about the Glasgow Leyland Atlanteans, the configuration and layout of the body meant that on the near side, the 3 long windows on each deck were out of alignment with the lower deck windows, this being caused by the stair panel. In fact, only one Edinburgh Atlantean had these windows properly aligned, and that was number 900, which was the prototype 33-foot long PDR2 bus, which was built in 1967. This one also been exhibited at the Scottish Motor Show, but in 1968. This bus had 82 seats, but it was to remain the only long wheelbase Atlantean in the Edinburgh fleet. Now, interestingly, only 2 of the first 25 of the batch delivered to Edinburgh Corporation had the panoramic window features. Perhaps they were just playing it safe to make sure the big window design actually worked. The rest of this batch had standard size windows, very similar to the Glasgow Corporation Leyland Atlanteans. From 1967, Edinburgh Corporation went and took the plunge when it came to Leyland Atlanteans. They were buying an average of just under 40 each year. In May 1975, the local government reorganisation brought the corporation's buses into the control of Lothian Regional Transport. And at that point, there was 375 Leyland Atlanteans trundling around Edinburgh, all with Alexander bodywork. Now, around this time, there was a trend of converting routes to one-man operation. The cost of operating buses with 2 crew members, a driver and a conductor, was proving to be rather expensive. And the bean counters at Lothian Regional Transport were keen to implement one-man operated buses. They started from 1969 to convert as many of the routes as they could to one-man operation, but this wouldn't be completed until 1980, when the last Leyland Titans were withdrawn. In the early 1970s, the Atlantean itself was undergoing a bit of an upgrade, and this would emerge as the most popular AN68 type Leyland Atlantean. And one of the differences with the AN68 over the old PDR range was the fact that they were fitted with the larger 11.1 litre Leyland 0680 engine instead of the 9.8 litre 0600. Edinburgh was an early customer of the AN68, taking 50 in 1972-1973. By now, of course, Alexander had also updated its bodywork for the Atlantean. The A and J type bodies carried by the earlier PDR Atlanteans were succeeded by the AL type body. As I mentioned previously, Lothian Regional Transport would take over the operation of the transport in the Edinburgh area from Edinburgh Corporation. And to be fair, many of the passengers wouldn't really notice an awful lot of difference because Lothian actually carried on using the same livery as Edinburgh, being painted in the madder and white colour scheme, but they were new crests and new legal lettering. Lothian also continued Edinburgh Corporation's buying policy with the Leyland Atlantean. In 1979, the opportunity was taken to upgrade the Edinburgh body specification on its Atlanteans. This would see changes to the destination display and hopper windows being fitted on the side windows. Now, one strange thing about the early panoramic windows that Edinburgh had was that they had no ventilators or no opening windows. Now, I bet in the days of people smoking on the bus, that must have been absolutely amazing, mustn't it? What fun that was. Although they did have roof lights fitted, but I'm not sure whether these roof lights opened. I think they might have done, to be fair. Some of these older buses had the opening windows fitted on the lower deck retrospectively, though. The interior of the Edinburgh Leyland Atlanteans was white and grey laminates, and the whole interior was designed to be functional and certainly looked fairly cold and clinical. The seats were a red vinyl, although there were a few, what was laughingly, I suppose, classed as coach Leyland Atlanteans, which were fitted with maquette seats, although these seats were standard bus seats rather than coach seats, so they were really rather anything other than coaches. Not even really a coach in bus clothing, is it really? The last Leyland Atlanteans for Lothian were 6 single-door buses for the airport, tour and limited stop duties. With these final buses, Edinburgh's Atlantean total came to 588 buses. And this can be broken down into 375, which were ordered for Edinburgh Corporation, and 213 for Lothian Regional Transport. Or, to look at it another way, there was 225 PDR type Leyland Atlanteans and 363 AN68 type Leyland Atlanteans. Most of the Atlanteans clocked up around 14 years service in Edinburgh, although some of the later examples went to nearly 20 years old before they were withdrawn. Now, here's an interesting little fact for you. There were 2 Atlantean fleet numbers missing in the Lothian Regional Transport fleet, and these were 599 and 600, these being from the 1979 delivery. These fleet numbers had been reserved for Leyland Titans, but this time not in the PD series, we're talking about the TN series. But, as we know, there were massive delays with the Leyland Titan production, and this caused Lothian, amongst other operators, to cancel their Titan orders. These Titan orders, incidentally, were replaced by the Leyland Olympian orders, which, of course, would go on to become Lothian's standard double-decker bus. Now, the first Leyland Olympians in the Lothian fleet were numbered 666, Lucky, and 667, which was following on from the last of the Leyland Atlanteans. But between the end of 1980 and the early part of 1982, the Lothian double-decker fleet was 100% Leyland Atlantean. The Lothian fleet certainly wasn't the largest Atlantean fleet in the country. The likes of Manchester, Glasgow and Liverpool each topped 1,000 buses. The last closed-top Lothian Atlantean operated on the 3rd of January 2000, and these operated on the 4 service. But this certainly wasn't the end of the Atlantean in Edinburgh, as over the years there's been more than 30 converted to open toppers, most of them deliberately. Now, a little while ago I did a video on the Selneck PTE Bristol VRs, and maybe I'll put a link to that up in the top right hand corner. Well, they had a habit of disabling their buses so that they couldn't be sold to competing bus companies. And although, as far as I know, Lothian didn't do that directly to any of their own vehicles, they did ensure that dealers and breakers disabled the buses to guarantee they couldn't run again and fall into the hands of competition. However, that wasn't to last, and some of the closed-top Atlanteans found new owners around the UK. There are around a dozen Lothian Atlanteans surviving in preservation, and these include 801, 806, 812, 867, 869, 900, 300, 1, 467, 469, 595, 621 and 658. Now, interestingly, the issues that Glasgow had with its panoramic bodywork was widely publicised. But Edinburgh and Lothian didn't do this quite so much, although I believe there were issues with the bodywork, but they rectified most of it in-house, as far as I know. Maybe you know differently. But there certainly didn't seem to be the big song and dance about it like there was from Glasgow. But I do find it hard to believe that Edinburgh didn't have the same problems with its panoramic windows as Glasgow, unless of course the drivers in Edinburgh are a little bit more sedate and genteel than the ones in Glasgow. Who knows? Maybe you can tell me in the comments. Now, I love reading your comments and recollections and memories down below, so I'm going to start the ball rolling with my own personal connection to the Lothian Leyland Atlantean. It must have been around 2001-2002 when Guide Friday were operating the Isle of Thanet sightseeing tour, and the bus was stabled at Westwood Bus Garage in Thanet in Kent. And the bus they were using was an open-topped, Alexander-bodied Edinburgh Leyland Atlantean. And I remember looking at that bus and thinking that was an absolutely gorgeous looking vehicle. Even with the roof taken off, it was still quite curvaceous and unique looking. And that, friends, is probably the last time I ever came into contact with an Edinburgh Corporation or Lothian Regional Transport Leyland Atlantean. So, as I said, I'm going to hand it over to you now. What's your recollections, what's your memories, and what's your thoughts on the Edinburgh Leyland Atlanteans? Please comment down below and let me know. I do try and reply to all of your comments if I can. I do hope you enjoyed this return journey, this look back into the past at these rather stunning looking buses. And you can't deny that the Alexander bodywork was one of the nicest bodyworks fitted to the Leyland Atlantean. If you did enjoy this video, please do like and share it, as it helps support the channel and it proves to the YouTube algorithms that people are actually watching the stuff that I'm making. Also, please support the channel by subscribing. It's free to do, and you just hit the subscribe button and hit the little notification bell, and that way you'll get notified every time I make a release in this and my other series here on YouTube. I'd like to take this opportunity of welcoming all the new subscribers and viewers to the channel. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all these new subscribers and new viewers to the channel. If you get 5 minutes, take a look at the older videos here as well. You look like a bus enthusiast with good taste, so there's going to be something here that will appeal to that good taste of yours. And don't forget, all the money raised from YouTube goes towards the upkeep and continued preservation to the buses in the Southern Counties Omnibus Collection. So by watching videos about old buses, you're helping old buses live their best life in their retirement, and that makes you a jolly good egg. Thank you ever so much for watching, and thank you again for supporting the channel. It honestly really does mean an awful lot to me. I will most certainly catch you next time. Bye for now.